We are now going to proceed with the final 30-minute presentation, which will be by the Canadian Environmental Law Association, which is PMD 14-P1.16 and 16A. Ms. McClanahan?
Thank you, Dr. Swanson, and thank you for hearing from us today with respect to our submissions to the Joint Review Panel. Most of the presentation is going to be delivered by Ms. Tanya Marquardt, our expert witness in this matter, and I don't think I need to belabor the slide about our organization you heard from us last year. So we did retain Ms. Marquardt again to review the new information, and she'll outline the scope of her review and the information she has for you here today.
Thank you, Teresa. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the panel. I'm pleased to be here today and happy to have the opportunity to give this presentation and to answer any questions that you and the public might have. CELA's focus in this presentation is on the report commissioned by CELA with the assistance of the Intervenor Funding Program. The objective of the commissioned report was to assess OPG's response to information request EIS 12-513. In this request, the JRP asked OPG to undertake an alternative means risk analysis, or AMRA. Specifically, the commissioned report analyzes the manner in which OPG in the AMRA addresses 1, contribution to sustainability, 2, conceptual consideration of alternative sites, and 3, the precautionary principle in its AMRA analysis. The summary of the report goes as follows. There are 3 key points. Number 1, serious questions remain about the approach and methods used in the risk analysis as they relate to and fulfill the contribution to sustainability requirement. Number 2, the conceptual consideration of a DGR in granite bedrock does not meet international standards or reflect international EA experience. By not requiring an investigation of alternative sites, the JRP has not addressed OPG's insufficient level of attention to the location issue. This risks giving the public the impression that the panel considers OPG's previous investments in the Bruce location a valid basis for its selection. And number 3, OPG must describe how the 3 criteria, risk avoidance, adaptive management capacity, and preparation for surprise, were applied, and the public must have a clear understanding of how each alternative would perform in relation to these 3 criteria. Now I'll go through each point in more detail. With respect to contribution to sustainability, information request EIS 12-513 asked OPG to consider contribution to sustainability in the risk to safety case section of OPG's AMRA. In a previous submission and presentation to the JRP in 2013, CELA focused on a commissioned report by Gaudreau et al. That explained the steps that OPG should have undertaken to fulfill the contribution to sustainability requirement. I won't go over that here, but basically the steps that OPG should have undertaken include setting out a comprehensive set of sustainability-based evaluation criteria, identifying the potentially reasonable options, including alternatives to and alternative means, showing how the criteria have been applied in the comparative evaluation of the options, and showing with clear justification, in light of the criteria, how the proposed project was selected as the preferred alternative. Throughout the EIS, however, OPG did not incorporate a comparative evaluation of the relative contributions to sustainability of the alternative means, and I won't go over our points about the EIS because we're focusing on the AMRA today. In the JRP's requested AMRA, the OPG had an opportunity to fulfill the EIS requirement for sustainability considerations in a transparent, systemic, and comprehensive way. But unfortunately, the OPG analysis reduced sustainability considerations to a simple table, Table 1 in OPG's response to information request EIS 06273. Table 1 does not address critical matters related to, for example, boom and bust effects, human health and safety, short and long-term economic costs, and cumulative environmental impacts. Table 1 also fails to illustrate how OPG's sustainability criteria were applied throughout the AMRA. Sustainability should have been conceived as an overarching concept from the outset of the AMRA, and OPG should have demonstrated how it used sustainability criteria in a systematic way throughout the evaluations to compare the options. So what we would have liked to have seen, ideally, in other words, is a risk assessment that was led by generic sustainability criteria. And then the pathways of harm that were created would then be framed as the context-specific concerns that surround the selection among options of best management of nuclear waste. And so then those generic criteria with the specified pathways of harm would have provided the evaluative framework, and then using the probability and consequences approach that was applied, the results that come out of that would have been related back to sustainability criteria. At the very least, we would like to see some discussion of how the sustainability matters that were present in the table could be discussed in terms of the results of the analysis. With respect to OPG's AMRA, serious questions still remain about how the approach used in the relative risk analysis relate to and fulfill the contribution to sustainability requirement, how sustainability criteria were incorporated into the risk analysis, how sustainability considerations influenced the risk analysis findings, and how the results of the risk analysis bear on the extent to which each option would contribute to sustainability. So in conclusion, as it stands, we feel that the public has really no clear understanding of how OPG's consideration of sustainability influenced the AMRA and design of the project. We feel that critical uncertainties remain with respect to how a preferred site is selected as the best option in terms of net social, economic, and ecological benefits to society over millennia. With respect to point number 2, conceptual consideration of alternative sites. CELA previously emphasized that siting is fundamental in the geological disposal of long-lived radioactive waste. A critical issue in OPG's consideration of alternative means was that a systematic comparative evaluation of alternative sites was not undertaken. In its request, the JRP stipulated the AMRA should include a conceptual DGR in granite bedrock, and OPG should use the extensive data and analyses available within the EA performed by Atomic Energy of Canada Limited for the Seaborne Panel. The conceptual consideration of a DGR in granite bedrock, however, is inadequate. Authorities hold that the most important issue in siting is the long-term safety of the site in relation to the geosphere. Moreover, international standards recommend sites should be selected after the investigation of a large region, the rejection of unsuitable sites, and the screening and comparison of the remaining sites. A selection should be made from several sites identified at the start of a siting process on the basis of the geological setting and other factors. A conceptual consideration of a DGR in granite bedrock, therefore, does not meet international standards. To overcome this issue, the JRP asked OPG to use available ACL data and analyses. However, the AMRA does not really clearly indicate which ACL data was used, as well as where and how it was used. Thus, it remains unclear how these sources influenced the comparative risk assessment. Regardless of how the data were used, failure to request an actual investigation of alternative sites, in our opinion, represents an unsupportable accommodation of OPG's initial conceptual consideration of alternative locations, and it disregards OPG's unjustifiable rationale for focusing its original alternative means investigation on sites within the Bruce location only. OPG's rationale for not evaluating other sites rests primarily on the willing host criterion. In conclusion, then, by not requiring an investigation of alternative sites, the JRP has not addressed OPG's insufficient level of attention to the location issue in the EIS process. This risks giving the public the impression that it considers OPG's previous investments in the Bruce location a valid basis for the selection of the Bruce site for the DGR. Point 3 relates to the precautionary principle. In our opinion, OPG's AMRA is replete with scientific uncertainties. The report in general describes and compares the hypothetical granite DGR to the DGR in the sedimentary rock of the Bruce site without presenting sufficient data or sources of information. It admits that the details of a DGR in granite rock are difficult to specify because there has been little characterization of a specific site in the Canadian Shield in Ontario. In an attempt to address this issue, the analysis rests on assumptions that skew the results towards favoring the Bruce location. And here I'm specifically talking about assumptions related to fractures in granite versus fractures in sedimentary rock. The EIS guidelines reiterate the importance of precaution as one of the guiding principles for the assessment. The guidelines provide minimum expectations in how OPG establishes it applied the precautionary principle in the design of the DGR project. The guidelines oblige OPG to evaluate and compare the alternative means of carrying out the project in light of 3 generic criteria: risk avoidance, adaptive management capacity, and preparation for surprise. In requesting the AMRA, OPG was provided an opportunity to appropriately consider these criteria. Again, however, OPG reduced its consideration to Table 1 in OPG's response to IR-EIS 6278. It appears that the information was added to the table after the risk assessment was completed. There's no explanation of the information in the table, and it overlooks important concerns related to risk avoidance, adaptive management capacity, and preparation for surprise. We feel that at a minimum, OPG must describe how the 3 criteria were applied as a framework for evaluating and comparing the alternative means, considering a range of plausible scenarios, how each alternative performs in relation to the 3 criteria. Finally, any conclusion about the most suitable option that emerges from the AMRA must explain why it was selected as the preferred option, giving explicit attention to risk avoidance, adaptive management capacity, and preparation for surprise. Finally, because probability of risks and the consequences of these risks relate to how certain we are about potential impacts and consequences, or uncertain we are, as well as the knowledge that we have about our options, we would ideally like to see an explicit discussion of the uncertainties surrounding the 4 options, respectively, and how these uncertainties then relate to the pathways of harm in the risk analysis. So this would strengthen our ability to better determine the best option, especially then steer away from the option that poses the greatest risks and uncertainties. Thank you.